Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below.
The commander of this deck is Toxrill the Corrosive. It is 5 black for a 7/7 legendary creature, Slug Horror. Ew. It has, at the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token. It also has pay a blue and a black and sacrifice a slug, draw a card. This is going to be a control deck with an Aristocrat sub-theme. We want to be controlling the board and retaining our life total as much as possible, as Toxrill does cost 7 mana to get down. When it does get on the board, we're going to want to protect it, as that effect to slowly wipe out our opponent's boards while giving us an army of slugs that we can turn into card advantage will help us push through and win the game. We'll also be playing some Aristocrat style drain effects so we take full advantage of all the things dying. Okay, this is a section I never thought I'd have to make, but first up we're going to go through some cards that synergize nicely with our commander and all the slugs. The more creatures we kill with our commander, the more slug friends we make. To help this, we can give our opponent's creatures to add to that number. The ones that make 1/1s will obviously be better, as it means if they come our way we won't take too much damage, and then they'll die as soon as it goes to our end step with Toxrill out. This is also where your political mastery can come to the forefront. The other way to make some creatures 1/1s is by turning our opponent's boards into teeny tiny creatures. You can either do this one at a time with cards like Diminish, or to a whole board with things like Polymorphist Jest. These will overlap with some of the removal spells we'll be playing later, so do keep that in mind. If you're not able to shrink down the creatures with a spell, you can shrink them down by adding to the -1/-1 counters, with cards that have Proliferate. These can really pile on the amount of counters and speed up the size of creatures that we can take out. I put a bulk on screen here, but you really don't need all of them. Some of these cards are cheaper than others, but I'm personally a big fan of Karn's Bastion, as it's an extra free card we can run in our land section, and then Yawgmoth will be really strong, as he also acts as a sack outlet. Because more is always more, we can look to running some clone effects to double up our commander. This will give us extra slime counters and importantly extra slugs. When picking clones, it's important to go for ones that don't care about the legend rule. Let's move on to our card draw. We'll want a fair bit in this deck, but we can help tie them into some of the things the deck is already doing for that synergy that we're after. First up is instants and sorceries. What we're looking for is effects that either let us sack creatures to draw cards with things like Plumb the Forbidden, or cards with Proliferate to add to the counters with things like Tezzeret's Gambit. And then we can have cards like Stinging Study, which reward us for playing a commander with a hefty mana cost. Next up is spells that allow us to sack creatures to draw us cards, or draw us cards when creatures die. This will play really nicely with all the slugs we'll be making, but these are also decent sack outlets that allow us to keep our deck moving forward even without Toxrill on the board. There's a few other more specific bits of card draw that the deck can run. Chasm Skulker can come out early and sit there getting bigger, then we can use it to refill our hand and give us a board state when it dies. Species Specialist naming slugs will get us a ton of value in the late game, and then Eloise turns all the creatures we'll be sacking into clue tokens, which we can then use to draw us some extra cards. Okay, let's talk about our ramp. With a 7 mana commander, this is definitely something we're going to be needing a fair bit of. First up will be rocks. We don't have green, so these will make up the biggest portion of our deck. Run the best ones that you have available to you. I'd personally want to keep them around 1 or 2 mana. After those, you can look to run some creatures that tap for mana. These would be fairly useful early game as blockers, and then if we need to, we can sack them to some of our other effects to get some additional value out of them. Then we can look to play some creatures that get lands out of the deck, either by sacking themselves or when they enter play. Burnished Heart and Solemn Simulacrum being colourless makes them easy to cast while allowing us to fix and ramp us ahead. Then there is a card like Ashnod's Altar that lets us sack some of our tokens early to help ramp out our commander. And then there are some other cards which benefit us from all the other things that are dying. These are definitely cards to run on top of your other effects, as you need ramp in order to get these out in the first place. Reveling Riches is a nice include, as with our commander out, that alternate WINCON becomes a lot easier to achieve. We've already mentioned a good chunk of our possible interaction in our Slug Matters section, but in a control-y deck like this, we definitely want to run some more. First up is effects in blue that leave behind a creature. These normally do pretty good at trading up in commander, and when our commander comes down, 2/2s and 3/3s will still die after a turn around the board. For board wipes, we have a couple of good options. The Meathook Massacre and Massacre Worm both have really nice synergies with the effects that turn our opponent's boards into 1/1s, and means they function as an additional copy of our commander in that respect. The Meathook Massacre doubling up as a drain effect, albeit the loss of life comes from our creatures, will still be a really good effect that we want. And then, as we're in black, there's a plethora of options, with Black Sun Zenith being a noticeable include, as it works really nicely with any Proliferate effects that we're running. Our protection section will also cross over to an extent with our interaction. Running some ways of countering opponents' targeted removal and board wipes will be really helpful. As we've mentioned, we don't want to be recasting Toxrill all too often. I would genuinely want to save these for any effects that target our commander, or stopping our opponents winning the game on the spot. There's similar effects on creatures that can also be of use, as again, these can block early game, and then protect Toxrill in the late game. Obviously, Lightning Grease and Swiftfoot Boots will do a decent job at protecting our commander, but they aren't as essential in this deck as the haste isn't too important. I'd probably prioritise the Greaves over the Boots, as we can get it down before Toxrill comes out, and we don't have to spend any mana to get it equipped. And then to protect our life total, we can look at running Propaganda and Crawl Space. They won't do too much in the late game, but they will do a good job at helping us get to the late game, so they will be solid includes as well. We're also going to touch on an Aristocrat package in the deck. We're going to start off with Token Makers. These will help keep us alive until Toxrill comes out, all the while we can feed them into some card draw effects to help things moving along. After those, you can look at running some Drain effects. You're looking for effects that also trigger off of our opponent's creatures dying. Ayara does this, as when a creature dies with Toxrill out, we make a black 1/1, so we'll get her Drain effect. So Conrad is probably the best one we can choose, as it triggers off of any creature dying, and importantly, deals damage to each opponent. In this deck, I don't believe you'll need dedicated sack outlets. We have effects that we want in card draw and our ramp, which do what we need while giving us the option to cash our creatures in. Our commander also has a sack outlet built in, which is another reason why things like Viscerasir aren't as necessary for winning the game. Talking of winning the game, there are a couple of cool effects that we want to run to get us over the line. First up is effects that bring creatures back to our side when they die. Geyser, Glorious Resurrector, and Grave Betrayal are perfect in this deck, as we can get them out before our commander, protect them with our spells and creatures, and then win pretty much straight away once our commander comes out. If you want to do that a bit quicker, there is also Rise of the Dark Realms. I'm a big fan of running at least one Haymaker in a deck, and this card will be great at any point when we can cast it. I put this in the WINCONS rather than the Slug package as it is a bit more all-in. Urborg makes all lands in play swamps, and then Cormus Bell turns all those swamps into 1/1s. When our commander comes out, we blow up all of our opponent's lands and make an army of slug tokens. This is pretty solid if you can get it off, just make sure you're in a point where you can win the game pretty quickly afterwards, as no one likes plays that just draw out the game for another hour. We've already mentioned some utility lands in the video, but for some others, Bojuka Bog is basically free in this deck, Phyrexian Tower and High Market are free sack outlets for us to include, and then cards like Commander Beacon and Memorial to Folly let us bring Toxrill back cheaper, either from the command zone or to our hand from the graveyard. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.